What's that you're saying? This voice on a Star Wars video? No, I'm not lost. I actually just kinda like Star Wars as well. But these scenes, even I can say, they should've got a bit more, shouldn't they? I'm Sean Ferrick for What Culture, and here are 10 Star Wars scenes that deserved so much more. Number 10. The Battle of Kashyyyk, Star Wars Episode 3, Revenge of the Sith. While the majority of the Clone Wars were skimmed over on the big screen, taking place largely between Attack of the Clones and Revenge of the Sith, the conflict between the Republic and the Separatists was brought to fans in Star Wars The Clone Wars. That doesn't mean that there was nothing of the battles in the movies, however, as Episode 3 did dip its toes into the Battle of Kashyyyk. The Wookiee homeworld was being invaded in what could have been a game-changing battle, as this was a system the Republic couldn't afford to lose, so Yoda and a battalion of clones were deployed. Who wouldn't want to see an army of giant Wookiees tearing countless battle droids limb from limb? Add in the clones, and of course Yoda, and this battle could have been an incredible addition to the prequel trilogy, if it was done right, which it wasn't. All that was shown of the Battle of Kashyyyk is one small scene that didn't actually show much fighting. Blasters were blasted, but there was no real action from the Wookiees. Make this sequence longer, give the big hairy monsters the screen time to really flex their muscles and rip some droid arms off, and this could have been awesome. Number 9. Finn vs. Captain Phasma, Star Wars Episode 8, The Last Jedi. In the build-up to The Force Awakens, alongside Kylo Ren and Supreme Leader Snoke as the key antagonists, there was also Captain Phasma. It seemed as if the chrome-plated stormtrooper would be something special in the new trilogy, but ultimately, she wasn't. After seemingly dying in Episode 7 with barely any screen time under her belt, Phasma returned to fight Finn again in Episode 8, and died with barely any screen time under her belt. Phasma was ultimately one of the most underdeveloped characters in the trilogy, and could have brought so much more to the table. Essentially, Gwendoline Christie's character was only used as a plot device and motivation for Finn. There's nothing wrong with a rivalry between the two, but there wasn't even a scrap of backstory or any attempt to treat her as a character in her own right. More screen time and development could have come at any time, but during the final battle in The Last Jedi is where audiences would have the right to feel more shortchanged. Had this dug into why they hated each other so much, who Phasma was, and why she was a cut above the rest of the stormtroopers there, could have been so much more impactful. Instead, all we got was Finn calling her Chrome Dome. Number 8. QuiGon Jinn's funeral, Star Wars Episode 1, The Phantom Menace. Although poorly received at the time, many Star Wars fans have come to feel that the prequels were treated too harshly, with one of the outstanding aspects of Episode 1 being Qui-Gon Jinn. The Jedi was, at this time, the master of Obi-Wan Kenobi, and was looking to take on Anakin Skywalker as an apprentice when he was ultimately struck down by Darth Maul in the Duel of the Fates. This was easily the most emotional moment in the entire movie. What should have been equally, if not more emotional, was Qui-Gon's funeral. The Jedi Knight was placed upon a pyre, and the image of his burning body should have been as solemn and meaningful, but the scene unfortunately missed the mark. The funeral itself was far too short, with the majority of the poignancy being ruined by Obi-Wan, Anakin, Yoda, and Windu talking through it, and then 2 seconds later you have a parade of Gungans quashing any emotion that hadn't already been robbed. Conclusion of The Phantom Menace needed to focus more on saying goodbye to Qui-Gon Jinn, and maybe a little bit less Jar Jar Binks. Number 7. A real explanation. Star Wars Episode 7, The Force Awakens. Fans were left with so many questions after The Force Awakens, and though some of them were answered in The Last Jedi, there was still plenty left wide open. The same can be said about The Rise of Skywalker, though arguably the biggest in the entire trilogy was asked in Episode 7, and remains unanswered still to this day. How did Maz get her hands on Luke Skywalker's lightsaber? Han asked what everyone was thinking when he saw her with it, to which Maz replied that it was a good question for another time. Who knew that such a time still wouldn't have come 8 years later? This is the most famous weapon in science fiction movie history, arguably, and having it connect with Rey, her subsequent journey to give it back to Luke, played a huge role in the trilogy. The story would have done well to expand on such an important detail and have Maz at least give Han or the audience something. She could have even told Rey directly, either on screen for the audience to hear or off screen for her to reiterate to Luke, as surely one of his first questions on Acto would have been, how has this complete stranger got my lightsaber? This essential storytelling could have been done in so many ways, but was unfortunately omitted. Number 6. Yoda's Exile, Star Wars Episode 3, Revenge of the Sith. Aside from Anakin's full descent into the life of a Sith apprentice, the third movie in the prequel trilogy had a lot of other loose ends to tie up. How were Luke and Leia separated? How did Obi-Wan Kenobi come to be Old Ben on Tatooine? And what exactly happened when Order 66 was executed? One of the biggest changes between Episodes 3 and 4 was the status of Yoda. The greatest Jedi Master alive fell defeated and retreated into exile with the help of Senator Organa, though it was only Yoda's initial idea that that was shown, not the exile itself. How exactly did he come to choose Dagobah? Were there any threats that he faced when he landed on the planet? Even just the sight of the place where Luke trained to be a Jedi all those years earlier would have been a bigger fan service kick than anything else in the trilogy. There was a deleted scene that showed exactly this, and it's a shame it didn't make the final cut. What harm would 30 more seconds of film have done just to show the little green Jedi landing on the iconic planet? Number 5. Rey's parents, Star Wars Episode 9, The Rise of Skywalker. There was a time when the question of Rey's parentage was up there as one of the biggest mysteries in Star Wars. After Episode 7, this was on everyone's minds as much as the true identity and backstory of Supreme Leader Snoke, both of which questions were kind of tossed aside by Rian Johnson. In spite of the teases that Rey's parents were someone important, The Last Jedi confirmed through Kylo Ren that they were just nobodies on Jakku who abandoned their child. J.J. Abrams, however, then wrote into Star Wars canon that Rey was actually the granddaughter of Emperor Palpatine. Kind of prefer them being nobodies, if I'm honest. This narrative thread felt more patched together than anything else across the trilogy, despite it being pretty important in crafting Rey as a character. This was something that deserved to be fully planned out and portrayed on screen from the beginning, rather than it being written on the fly as the movies went along. What makes this even worse is that the incredibly talented Jodie Comer was cast as Rey's mother to be on screen for a matter of seconds with no more than 3 lines of dialogue to speak. This honestly feels like more of a waste than Benicio del Toro as DJ, and the whole thing deserved more. Number 4. Zeb takes Callus to Liras, Star Wars Rebels. One of the overarching narratives of Star Wars Rebels is how a single cell numbering no more than 5 or 6 grew and joined the wider rebellion against the Empire. Ezra, Captain Rex, and even Ahsoka Tano came to fight side by side with the likes of Kanan and Hera throughout the series, before joining up with Mon Mothma and Leia and what they were building. What the group also managed to do was to bring in at least one former Imperial on their side. This came in the form of Callus, someone who had been hell-bent on bringing the rebellion down until he saw no reason and defected. The turning point for Callus was when he was struck on Barin with Zeb, and the two managed to actually bond, even in spite of Callus's history. He was part of an Imperial mission that saw the Lasat people driven from their home, but he found common ground with Zeb while stranded and eventually joined the rebellion himself. At the end of the final episode of the series, as Sabine wrapped everyone's story up, she told of how Zeb took Callus to Liras to show him that he hadn't seen to the extinction of the Lasat people. This, given the background of the characters and how compelling Zeb and Callus's self-contained episode was, deserved more than to be just part of a montage. This should have been a real emotional scene, or even an entire episode in its own right, instead of being skimmed over like this. Number 3. Boba Fett versus Cad Bane, The Book of Boba Fett. The Book of Boba Fett was a weird series, to say the least. At just 7 episodes, it was shorter than a Mandalorian season, half of it was a flashback, and a big chunk of the other half was a diversion you could essentially label The Mandalorian 2.5. This left relatively little time for the main story that pitted Boba Fett against the Pike Syndicate. In particular, it was the live-action debut of Cad Bane that brought a certain sense of intimidation and power, particularly after shooting Cobb Vanth. And yet, the fan favourite only showed up in the last 2 episodes of the series and barely actually shared the screen with Fett himself at all. Their minimal interaction boiled down to the one scene in which they dueled, but given their backgrounds as bounty hunters, their history together, and the fact that Bane was such a good character in Star Wars The Clone Wars, this confrontation should have been given far more time and attention. The entire dynamic between Boba Fett and Cad Bane can go down as wasted potential, as this moment paid off an arc that was introduced in an episode of The Clone Wars that was never even produced. Number 2. The Death of Darth Maul, Star Wars Rebels. Darth Maul made his live-action return to Star Wars screens in 2018 with the release of Solo, a Star Wars story, but the former Sith apprentice had been a very busy boy in the animated world with appearances in both Star Wars The Clone Wars and Star Wars Rebels. His ultimate plans of power and revenge on Emperor Palpatine were nothing compared to the hatred he felt for Obi-Wan Kenobi. The young Jedi had sliced Maul in half and left him to die, but it was Maul's focus on such hatred that kept him alive. While acting as a thorn in the side of Ahsoka and Obi-Wan during the Clone Wars, Maul was doing everything he could to get in a room with the latter and exact his long-awaited revenge. That was ultimately something that spilled over into Rebels, where the two finally met again on Tatooine. Though they had crossed blades twice more between the Duel of the Fates and this moment, it was under the twin suns that it would end. The final battle lasted mere seconds, as Obi-Wan killed Maul for good this time, but it did feel like something of an anti-climax. The fight had been all Maul's storylines were building up to, and it was gone in the blink of an eye. Number 1. Luke and Ahsoka, The Book of Boba Fett. Aside from the likes of Din Djarin and Grogu, 2 characters new to the Star Wars universe who immediately became incredibly popular, The Mandalorian has seen some appearances by some big names from a galaxy far, far away. Cameos from Star Wars Rebels favourite Zeb and the legendary Boba Fett have been dwarfed by appearances from both Luke Skywalker and Ahsoka Tano. Both initially appeared in separate episodes of the 2nd season of The Mandalorian, but finally came together in the Book of Boba Fett. The 2 characters will always be connected to each other through Anakin Skywalker. Luke is, of course, the son of Darth Vader, while Snips was Anakin's Obi-Wan's Padawan for a long time, and arguably knew him better than anyone. Imagine what these two Jedi had to say to each other. This would have been a window for Luke to get to know his father better than any other, thanks to the stories Ahsoka could tell. Unfortunately, their time together in the series was so short that all fans really got to see if their interaction was a chinwag about Grogu and their goodbye. There could have been so many deep, meaningful, and compelling conversations had they a little more screen time together. Arguably, this could have been better than anything else the series put on screen. That is everything for our list. What do you think, folks? What do you think were the scenes that deserved more? Or, just for the fun of it, let us know the scenes you love the most in the comments below. I have been Sean for What Culture. You can follow me over on Twitter at Sean Ferrick. Don't forget to follow What Culture on Twitter as well. You are awesome, you are wonderful, and you know I'm going to say it. Until I see you again, may the Force be with you. I'm so sorry. Have a good one.